Do you ever feel like your partner is never truly satisfied in the relationship? Or better yet, do you feel like you're never truly satisfied in your relationship, or you have a pattern of that, of just feeling dissatisfied, like something isn't right? Well, if so, then this video is for you. Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Nicole. Welcome back to the channel. And I want to talk about the role of expectations and communication in relationship satisfaction. So let's dig into it. Let's be honest, it's not uncommon for couples to feel dissatisfaction with the relationship, with each other, to feel like their needs aren't getting met, and many other things that just feel like make it feel like this is just not. And this can stem from a variety of different reasons. Anything from having expectations that you feel are not being met. And I'm going to talk about where that comes from in a minute, as well as communication barriers. That's one of the big ones. People feel like, I don't know how to communicate. We're not communicating well. He doesn't hear me. I don't understand him, right? There's usually some discontent or dissatisfaction around communication. So, we're going to talk about why you need to focus on communication and why it's a dance and not just on the other partner, right? So, when partners aren't on the same page, it makes it easier for misunderstandings, assumptions, and frustrations to build up. And usually, when these things build up, it builds a wedge between us. We feel like dissatisfied. We feel like alone because sometimes people don't want to talk about their dissatisfaction and how it can actually be a normal part of relationship development and personal growth. Okay. So let's think about this. Where do you feel like there's usually a mismatch in expectations and in communication? According to a study by the American Psychological Association, among the top sources of dissatisfaction in terms of expectations and communication are feeling like your plans for the future, your desires for the future don't match. And so feeling like sometimes there's been a wedge or growing apart where these two things are different. But also feeling like it's hard to express your feelings clearly, or that your partner is not expressing their feelings clearly, and feeling like you're not being listened to or you don't know how to listen to your partner. So that's key, right? Feeling like you're in two different places, feeling like it's hard to express yourself, and feeling like you're not being heard or seen. And it makes sense that those would be the key things that would lead to feeling dissatisfied. Because in a relationship, we want to feel connected. What helps us to feel connected is when we feel seen and heard, and we feel like there's commonality, there's common ground with our partner. That's what it makes it feel like our relationship is special or different from relationships with friends or family or so forth. It's that connection, it's that sense of having an understanding, sometimes an unspoken bond. But part of the problem with that is when too much is unspoken, when we have these unspoken bonds, we feel so connected. Part of what happens is we stop communicating. We start making more assumptions, and we let our expectations, our unspoken expectations, run wild. So, where do these unspoken expectations come from? Well, you're probably right if you're guessing the broader society, media, and now social media. I talk to so many women who feel like their relationship isn't measuring up to what they perceive other people's relationship to measure up to. And that causes a sense of dissatisfaction. And there's a lot of research around this social comparison. We compare ourselves to other people, and then we start feeling worse about what we actually have. So, in some ways, part of the solution is to stop comparing yourself, right? And to know that just because you're looking at somebody else's highlights and you're comparing that to your real life and its ups and downs and its normal challenges. And so when we have expectations that we haven't spoken, or if our partner has expectations that they haven't said to us, it's easy to assume that those expectations, first of all, are they should be met, right? Sometimes we have expectations that aren't realistic because we're expecting someone else to bring us a sense of satisfaction and so forth. So that's part of it. And then the other part is we're just making assumptions. Usually we're making assumptions that our partner doesn't want to fulfill our expectations because we feel like they should know our expectations. Our expectations are normal and valid. So if they're not being met, it's because they just don't want to. So then we start to take it personal. So, one clue that your expectations either are unrealistic or you haven't voiced them or you haven't given your partner a chance to even know that that's what you expect is if you feel like it's personal, right? Or on the other hand, if you perceive that your partner feels like they're taking it personally that this particular thing isn't happening, right? What's a common conflict or disagreement that partners have, right? Usually one is neater than the other, or one communicates in a way that the other doesn't, or one thinks that something that's not being done is a big deal, and the other person feels like, well, it's not that big of a deal, right? And that's because we all have different upbringings. We all have different values, right? No matter how similar our backgrounds may seem, we all come from a specific family culture that communicated differently. Some families are everything is on the table, they verbalize everything. Everyone is in everybody's business, right? There's very little boundaries. There's other families where things were more secretive or they didn't communicate explicitly as much, or they had very individualistic, they weren't as like super connected. And so those experiences can really influence what you expect in your own relationship. And that's one of the reasons why things like premarital counseling, having premarital discussions about expectations again, about upbringing and so forth can be so important because they help to clarify what is unspoken in your head so that you're not projecting that onto your partner and then taking it personal when it doesn't happen. Okay. So these expectations often come from society, from social media, from our own backgrounds. And here's when you know you need to rework or revamp your expectations. One is if you have the expectations that everything is supposed to be perfect, if you feel like there should never be any disagreement, make sure you look at my video on how fighting saved my relationship. So you'll hear about how disagreement is healthy, right? So if you have the expectation that things should always be blissful, always happy, no disagreements, you're putting a lot of pressure on the other person and on your relationship, right? Now, for the most part, we want to, it's possible, we want to feel fulfillment in our relationship. But if we put too much pressure on it being perfect, then we get really triggered and we start to fall apart at the slightest little hint that everything isn't perfect. So you have to look at whether or not you are expecting things to be perfect, whether you have an idealized image that's either coming from what you've seen on TV or social media or what you've been told. And sometimes when people who come from less stable family backgrounds are actually painting, they're having this idealized view of marriage and relationships because that was what they wanted. And so they project that desire, that wish onto their actual relationship. And actual relationships are a little bit more complex than just perfect and idealized. Okay. Now, communication is a big one. As I said, we all have different communication styles, but there's some research that shows that there are some healthy communication styles for relationships, and there's some deadly ones. And Gottman talks a lot about the four horsemen in relationships that can really derail it. So when there's a lot of criticism, contempt for your partner, stonewalling, which is like a passive aggressive silent treatment, and defensiveness, where you're taking everything personally. No one, your partner can't give you feedback. That those communication styles can really spell disaster for a relationship, and they tear a relationship apart. Now, healthy communication styles allow for disagreement, they allow for individuality. So, another great researcher, Esther Perel, talks about how we all have a desire for connection and closeness and intimacy. We also have a desire for separateness and individuality. And that is just normal. And so much of relationships is balancing those two and balancing the communication for those two. Sometimes when we want to be really close, we can feel like we can read each other's minds. And that's that whole unspoken, you get me, I get you. Sometimes though, we change, we grow, we're in different places. We're more in our individual zones, and we might need to be more clear in what we want and how we're feeling, and what we, how where we are with things, right? So there's different levels of communication. Sometimes it really is nonverbal communication, connecting, sensuality, sexuality, connecting on that realm. But sometimes it's really learning to, first of all, be clear with what you are feeling, where you are, what you want, and understanding that your partner deserves to hear from you on that. Um, Again, not in a contemptuous way, not in a critical way, not in a way where you're defensive and you're like, well, I don't want to hear what you have to say because you did X, Y, and Z, and you're bringing up all of these gripes that you have from the past that you never expressed, right? We're not talking about that kind of communication. We're talking about a kind of communication that requires personal growth. And that's where I want us to kind of end with this, is that so much of relationship communication, fulfillment and happiness, satisfaction, depends on personal growth. Personal growth means I'm going to look within before I start accusing someone else. I'm going to try to understand patterns if I'm constantly feeling unheard, unseen, if I'm constantly trying to run to my partner's rescue when they express a feeling that isn't so happy or good, and I'm trying to make them not feel that, right? Like, am I in a place where I'm overly defensive because I've been hurt? Am I in a place where um, there's codependency? I'm trying to always fix someone and care for someone. And so I exhaust myself, right? So there's a personal growth aspect to relationship satisfaction, because if you don't understand you, you can't expect someone else to understand you. If you don't know how to communicate to yourself, to try to understand your feelings, your wants, your desires, your needs, it's going to be hard for somebody else to read your mind and just automatically understand those things about you, right? So the key to relationship satisfaction comes from actually understanding that your personal happiness starts and ends with you. You cannot expect somebody to always be able to make you happy. You have to understand how to soothe yourself and nurture yourself, because no other person, no matter how great they are, is going to always be able to fulfill that role, right? So there's a personal development aspect to all relationship satisfaction. The personal development that is key for relationship satisfaction on both ends, for you to be satisfied and for you to understand the factors that help your partner to be satisfied, is one, taking ownership of your own happiness. We all are, at the end of the day, we're individuals. We, as much as we connect and we're in groups and we're in communities, we are still individuals. And so we have to take ownership of our own happiness. The other thing is interrogating your expectations. What unexpressed expectations do you have in your relationship that could be hijacking your relationship? Are there expectations that are based on your unconscious needs and desires, and you need to get more real with yourself? And are there some expectations that you haven't voiced and you're just thinking that this should be common knowledge, but you really haven't taken the time or the ownership again to actually express them? And then the other thing is always brushing up on and honing your communication skills. My mantra is it's about time, space, and tone. You have to have the right timing, right? Communication is a dance. You want to look at your tone of voice. If there's a difference between, honey, I have something I really need to talk to you, babe, this is important to me, versus, look, I'm sick of this. We need to talk right now. Sit down, like that aggressiveness, right? And then the third thing is sometimes you have to give space, right? As I said, Esther Perel says we both need closeness and distance. So we have to look at the space. Sometimes you have to say something and let it sit and not always expect an immediate reaction. Sometimes you have to realize you might be giving too much space because you're avoiding talking about something that's a little more difficult. So look at your timing, look at the tone, and look at how much space both you and your partner need. Okay? So again, if you are feeling dissatisfied, ask yourself these key questions about your expectations, about your communication, about just what's going on, what's unspoken between you and your partner. Okay, let me know in the comments what you think. What have you learned about the role of personal growth in your relationship satisfaction? What have you observed with your partner, and how do you want to get better? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications bell, and share and like this video. Thank you so much for being on this journey and joining my YouTube channel. Again, it's Dr. Nicole, and I will see you next time.